Welcome back. Ultra processed foods versus Dr. Hyman. Which is more dangerous? Dr. Hyman will say anything to get you to believe that eradicating ultra processed foods will solve chronic disease and all the world's ills and problems, and to buy his ultra processed supplements and books. And what he does when he's doing these things, he's boosting his credibility by sowing public distrust in health services and disavowing the scientific process. So his manufactured outrage makes it hard for you to know what to eat and how to live your life. It makes you think everything you try to eat is dangerous. Let's talk about this a little bit. Today, June 3rd, 2024, he posted on Instagram this Daily Mail article from Friday. Let me show you what it looks like. This is the headline: Ultra processed foods do not cause obesity, says US government's top diet advisors in bombshell review of current evidence. Studies have been biased. And he had a commentary on it. I'll tell you about it. Basically, what this article is saying: the US Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, whose findings inform nutrition labels and public health recommendations for food, found limited evidence these foods cause people to gain weight faster than any other food after reviewing more than a dozen studies dating back to the 1990s. They said they had serious concerns about bias in the studies that have linked ultra processed foods to weight gain, chiefly because the definition of ultra processed food isn't an exact science, which means that the studies may be subject to misclassification bias. Click like if you're following this. A dietitian in Missouri, in the article link below, said, sadly, this is valid until we have one definition for ultra processed. The body of evidence won't provide a clear answer. Now, that's just the background of it. The problem is Dr. Hyman indicates that in his commentary on his Instagram post, indicates that 9 to 20 members of that DGAC may have conflicts of interest with food manufacturers. He mocks the not conclusive findings of the report, linking ultra processed foods to obesity, and attributes several chronic diseases to UPFs. And he makes a straw man of big foods tactics, calls out the Biden administration, USDA, a whole bunch of agencies, all to review the evidence on ultra processed foods to do what? And that is the question when you look at this. And the thing is, people are really mad about this. I have it right here. So sad. Our government, exactly what the government wants: fat, unhealthy, non meds. One hand feeds the other. Bottom line, our government doesn't care about us. They're just looking for the paychecks to say that these big industries want them to say. So I want us to take a look at what is happening with this kind of information. Does it count as disinformation? Is it a cult? Questions for that. And then I also want to look at my understanding of this. The biggest problem is the definition of ultra processed. Why you should think critically to avoid misinformation from social media influencers like Dr. Hyman, or maybe even myself. And then I'm going to give you some context for this story, how Dr. Hyman's cult of outrage fragments our understanding of health science, and questions to ask yourself to manage misinformation. With the 3 questions: what's the context, what's the intended result, and what are the consequences? So, say first time here, welcome. My name is Reggie. I'm the founder of Fit for Freelance, where I build adaptive business leaders through compassionate health coaching. I got a whole presentation lined up because a bunch of people were sending me this today. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool enough, but this is misinformation. I think it needs to be addressed when we're talking about ultra processed food. Science-based is a core value of Fit for Freelance. And a little disclosure, I have close affiliations with the Public Health Department and the Medical Writers Association. My views do not necessarily reflect any other organization. I'm not pro ultra processed food. I want to be clear on that. I'm not saying it's good for you. I'm pro accurate information. So just as Dr. Hyman is taking a stand against ultra processed foods, I'm taking a stand against scientific misinformation, exaggeration, and public confusion that makes it so you don't know what to eat or who to trust, because these are serious everyday problems that are getting stirred up when you see these things online. So let's get into this, starting with some context. So when you see that headline, you're like, this is outrageous. The government doesn't care about us. What's going on? We can't get any good information anymore. So I've linked this below, this May 2024 article in The Guardian. The headline: the US food industry has long buried the truth about their products. Is that coming to an end? And that is a concern. Things haven't always been straightforward when it comes to these government agencies. However, I don't think this is the right battle to pick. I think this is social media dramatization. All right, but I'll tell you about this context. The US FDA is currently developing a front of package label that could require corporations to begin printing as early as 2027. And despite significant opposition from food companies, they're saying it's like the big tobacco playbook, like let's pretend our product isn't unhealthy. The FDA is evaluating different mandatory label designs to determine which is the most effective at informing consumers, but also which is legal under US corporate free speech laws. All right. So currently, labels only mark nutrients of concern like sugar and sodium, not ultra processed foods. You look at the front of any bag of chips or whatever you're eating, you'll see it has how much sodium's in it, how many like servings in a package, how much sugar, and those are the things, but it doesn't tell you whether it's ultra processed. And why this is important, adding more context, of course, key to understanding the information. Ultra processed foods make up 73% of the US food supply, according to this study, and provide average US adult with more than 60% of their daily calories. For most of human history, the greatest challenge in the food industry was having enough nutritious and safely preserved food to feed everyone year round. The industrialization of the food supply solved that problem for most of the world and definitely most of the developed world. And that's from a professor at NYU. It's a really thorough article linked below on YouTube. Check it out. Research is increasingly linking ultra processed foods to a whole host of health issues from cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes to colorectal cancer and depression. So not just, your run of the mill weight gain, which is what was specific in the title. Ultra processed foods are not directly causing weight gain, but they happen to be, coincidentally, more than that, it's almost like a causative effect proven at this point that it's linked to these other diseases and it can be a serious problem. So we're not going to downplay that and act like that's not an issue. However, you can't like go the other way in an extreme way without having the science to bear that out. All right. And so more background. A few years ago, Chile introduced the first nutrition warning label in the world, a black stop sign shaped label that companies were required to add if a food exceeded a high enough threshold of sugar, salt, saturated fat, or calories. The researchers determined that the most effective nutrition labels use icons to interpret information for consumers. So usually, like you're meant to read the food label on the back of nutrition facts, but not everyone does that. Not everyone knows how to do that. Some people can't read it all, right? So and it's hard to add context if you just see the number, right? Or you can't interpret the percent daily value if you don't know what a percent is, I guess. So instead of just saying, 570 milligrams of sodium on the back, in the front, it can say high in sodium or excess sodium, or maybe even like a little skull and crossbones, like don't eat this snack or whatever. So you're less likely to eat that ultra processed food. That could be helpful. That's what the researchers determined that was an effective nutritional label. A professor at the UNT School of Public Health said front of package labels are this huge opportunity to really level the playing field and make that information more accessible. And so that is the background for why when you see this, you're wondering, how is this a thing? You could be a little outraged by it. That's fine, but we want to make sure we understand what's going on. The studies have been biased according to the findings in the initial research. All right. Daily Mail, only segments of the report on ultra processed foods have been uploaded, and they suggest there's nothing intrinsic about processed food that causes obesity. All right, so the thing is, people will see that headline and immediately get outraged and talk about how the government doesn't care about you, how no one cares about you. It's every man for himself out here except Dr. Hyman, who always has your back. People cheering him on for kind of exaggerating the situation, and no one's reading the actual article. One of the dietitians interviewed by the Daily Mail said she wasn't in a review that had those findings. She says, understandable that people would read this portion of the report and react angrily. What they're saying is that there's no relationship between ultra processed foods and larger body size or greater body fat. But what they're saying is that right now we don't have enough conclusive research to come out and say avoid all ultra processed foods. It's a key distinction that we can't glaze over reasonably and scientifically. It's something you would do if you were big on misinformation instead. All right, and that amount of calories that one, shuffle these up, but the amount of calories that one eats is the most important factor for weight gain. And it's not just specifically whether a food is ultra processed or defined as ultra processed or anything like that. So there is a system in place. It's called the Nova system, it leaves room for interpretation on what is classified as an ultra processed food. And it doesn't classify foods based on nutritional content. So if you think of some examples, an example in that article is Mountain Dew versus whole grain. Now, Mountain Dew is ultra processed, it's got all kinds of chemicals and stuff in it, but it doesn't have any nutrition value. It's just got stuff. However, something like whole grain bread, that's ultra processed, it's refined, it's ground up and baked and preserved and all this stuff. It's that is also ultra processed. And then when you eat foods, you process them further. It's a whole different topic. But between Mountain Dew and whole wheat, whole grain bread, they're like two different things that can be considered ultra processed. And it doesn't make sense to group them all together. And that's what this report is finding so far. It's easy to get bent out of shape or riled up or fired up by information and have a knee-jerk reaction to this, but it's not like that. It's not that straightforward to where you can say all ultra processed foods are bad, because it doesn't really say what's in the foods. So I really want to like point that out and make that very clear, that the ultra processed foods they're connected to these things, but it's not specifically because they're ultra processed. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think about this topic. We can talk about it more, because this is something that gets glazed over all the time, and then people miss it, and then there's misinformation, and it's hard to keep up, and then you don't know what to eat when it ends up. Okay, so the important thing to ask, what's the context? You don't just read a headline and go through and say like a broad statement like ultra processed foods are bad. Like, most people understand you. However, when you're looking at a like governmental findings report and things that are going to have impact, you want to know the context behind what's going on that supports that. And what I want you to do, I encourage you to do this, is read for yourself, not just a headline and your favorite influencer's caption. So I always link my stuff below. When you can follow through and think through critically what's going on, you can give yourself a great opportunity to make informed decisions and not just blindly follow people. Make sure you're thinking critically about what you're doing when it comes to your health and your life. Don't rely on like other people or the government or anyone to really direct your decisions. Okay. Next question I want you to ask, what's the intended results? And so when I was reading the caption about, the government, or implying that the government can't get it together and is always misleading you and all that stuff, I immediately wonder, what is the intended result? Like, what does Dr. Hyman really want us to do? And he really sets it up. So it's like, you can't trust the government, and you can only trust me because I'm giving you information and pointing out that the government doesn't care about you, kind of thing. And that is a serious issue in terms of misinformation. I want to point that out. I think it's important to note that like a doctor or anyone who studies the topics of public health and eating knows that food labels aren't the solution. It can contribute, right? Think about tobacco, where they put those giant like "this can kill you" label. That's only like one part of the problem in terms of getting people not to use it. So to go through and like list these agencies, call out whatever like administration, and make it seem like the government doesn't care about you is really out of order, in my opinion, because it's beyond the scope of what he's talking about. And he knows that. Like, you would have to like not be paying attention to think that food labels are just the only reason why people are eating ultra processed foods, right? Other things to think about when it comes to public health, food access, as far as supply. Do we have enough food? And that's a big thing when it comes, like, I always get on rants about like the anti-GMO movement. And then these processed foods, these are like some of the only foods people eat. Like the stat showed 60% of people get most of the calories, or something like, I was switching it up, but they get 60% other calories from these processed foods, not necessarily the ultra processed, but these foods that sustain life. And are they affordable? And if you are following these kinds of influencers, you think, I can't eat anything that's ever been treated with pesticides. I can't eat anything that's ever been genetically modified or selectively bred, and you run into these issues that would make your food infinitely more affordable, or you don't eat fruits and vegetables unless they're organic or something. And then you've got a whole different set of problems, right? Also, nutrition education, knowing what to eat, knowing how to read the food label. If something says high in sodium, you're gonna be like, how high, right? And you need the information on the back, and you need the context for your own health. So if you don't have that, you don't have the nutrition education you need. Environmental factors like time and work stress are also big factors here. If you don't have time to meal prep, you don't know how to get foods, if you don't have access to foods, if you are working two jobs, like these are things that are going to affect whether you are eating these high ultra processed foods, if you're grabbing snacks, all that stuff, and that's going to make a huge difference and whether you can access that. So when you're reading someone outraged about a headline like this, or making it seem like every ultra processed food is super bad for you, then you're not going to be able to, make informed decisions for yourself. Also, outrage gets attention. Dr. Hyman has a podcast with ad sponsors, YouTube channel. He has a store with 586 supplements. I just looked that up before this episode, and then 11 books. So he's trying to sell you something, and a lot of that comes from the concept that only I can help you. Basically, is what he's saying. Like, you can't trust all these other people. Trust me instead. Buy my stuff. Get these supplements because you don't know what's in your food. So make sure you're getting this extra nutrition from me. And then the video thumbnails are extra dramatic, right? This food makes you sick. You may never eat processed food. So it's making it seem like you're gonna die if you have these foods. Warning, don't eat these. How ultra processed foods is slowly killing us. Like, come on, dude. So when you're looking at that, that is a very dramatic, misinformative situation that can really cause a lot of problems, and it can be dangerous. It's misleading, to say the least, and it could get worse as more like in the future you don't know who to trust, so then you are guessing what to do, and you, I don't know, have to follow Dr. Hyman and everything he says, and he's just one person who could have his own mix of special interests, like selling his own products wherever he's working with, that won't be science-based either. So that's another thing to think about. Outrage gets attention, and then ask yourself, what are the consequences of something like this? Like, what do you think is going to happen when people don't know who to trust? If you are intentionally going after specific agencies for their inability to come to a consensus to act, like he's making a call to action that they should be reviewing what an ultra processed food is more thoroughly, but that's not going to get the results that he's intending unless his intention is to cause people to trust agencies less. So think about that. Important topic. I wanted to address that. Took a little bit longer than I was expecting, but some things to think about. Those three questions: what's the context? What's the intended result? What are the consequences? And maybe ultra processed foods aren't as universally bad as you might expect. Maybe the misinformation is what you really should be looking out for. If you want to learn more about this, watch next Secrets to Sort Through Weight Loss Information. I made a video about this. I'll put it right here. Leave a comment below, click like, and let me know what you think. As always, keep practicing. Peace.